Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about The Mandalorian and Grogu. And this is going to be a full spoiler review, so if you haven't seen the film yet and, want to completely go in fresh, now's your chance to click away, because I will be talking about spoilers. This is your warning. Okay, spoiler warning, out of the way. So, I've sat on this film for about a week now. I've had some time to think about it and let my thoughts settle, and honestly, I think that's kind of helped me figure out exactly how I feel about it. My overall opinion, I liked it. I had a good time. I don't think it's a bad film at all, but I also think, it's a particularly memorable one. I don't think it's a particularly memorable one. That's what I mean. For me, this is probably sitting about, I think, like a 2.5 to 3 star film out of 5. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 on my letterbox. So for me, like 2.5 or 3 star is kind of like, it's kind of an okay film, For me, it wasn't amazing. It's not something I'll be thinking about months from now. It's just okay. And sometimes being just okay can actually be a problem. More than I think sometimes when you go out hating a film or not liking a film. When you watch a great film, people leave the cinema talking about it. When you watch a terrible film, people leave the cinema talking about it. But when something is just fine, mediocre, people tend to move on pretty quickly. And I see that whenever I go to see like a theatre play, soon when you hear other people as they're walking out of the theatre asking like, oh, what do you want for dinner? Like, something's kind of like, it just means that it's done nothing for them. They've just kind of left thinking, oh, that was okay, that was all right, and that's kind of where I am with, I think, The Mandalorian and Grogu. I think it's a very safe movie, and that's kind of, I think, largely the problem. It doesn't take many risks. It doesn't really challenge the audience in any way, and it doesn't do anything particularly controversial. And it doesn't dramatically change the Star Wars universe, which is okay. That's all right, but it's a very safe movie, which means it gives you very little to kind of talk about and think about. And it just gives you a very straightforward adventure with, Din Djarin and Grogu. And as I said, there is nothing wrong with that. That does not make it a bad film in any way. I just don't think it leaves much of an impact once the credits roll. It's after the film where, during the film you're like, oh, this is okay, this is alright, but then, once the film's ended, it's kind of like, okay, cool, like, that was alright, One thing I absolutely did love, though, in the film, I feel like that's kind of, I suppose, something controversial, but I quite like the music. Is it R&B, or like it's very retro? I don't know, really. It's kind of got a cool beat they've added to the Mandalorian theme. I thought the soundtrack in quite a lot of the film was pretty good, and I think even some of the more modern remix nightclub style tracks really worked for me. I don't know why. I just thought it was a good vibe. it was Mon Mothma dancing in Andor. It was just a good vibe. But I suppose Star Wars music has always been one of the franchise's strengths. They always do have like good music, and I thought this film kind of continued that tradition really well. The score gave scenes energy and atmosphere. It created, and it was probably one of the things I found myself remembering most after leaving the cinema. That was something that I kind of, I guess, picked up on. And the action was really solid. The action in the action film was really good. There's some like really good fun fight sequences throughout the film, and Din feels like he's kind of operating at the top of his game now. You know, he's kind of done like a lot of missions, and we've seen him, you know, seen him in the series. We've kind of seen him progress. You know, in the series, he's kind of a bit sloppy sometimes, but in this film, you know, everything's kind of done quite a lot with precision. And he handles really stressful situations really well when they do show up or arise. And I think that's, you know, you can see that he's gained experience, and now it feels like we're seeing the results of that in this film, which I thought was kind of cool. It was good that they kind of started like that, you know. And we'll kind of get more onto a little bit of the opening. But, you know, there are moments where he's cutting through enemies and he's handling situations with a confidence, you know, that really sells how experienced he's become. And I think that's really cool, you know. And it's the same with Grogu, to be fair. You know, the opening sequence of that was really cool. You know, but I think it was just really incredibly fast. Normally with Star Wars, you'll kind of get like a little bit of breathing room. And, you know, kind of like, you know, where the title sequence kind of shows, you kind of have a ship traveling through space, and, you know, the nice calm music that kind of sets you into the world sort of at ease, or eases you into it, I suppose. But this was very just like, bam, like, let's go. Which isn't bad. To be honest, it kind of fits the vibe of the film, really. It's quite fast-paced. It progresses pretty quickly, and it doesn't allow you to kind of sit with things. But I feel like that's kind of, oh God, that's quite a big conversation. I feel like that's quite happening, to be honest, with a lot of films. Everything feels so rushed now. Everything's very quick. But this was an action adventure, so I don't know. I guess, you know, it kind of has to be, I suppose, in a way. But I feel like I wish there was a bit more breathing moments. Not necessarily like a bad thing that it was quick, you know, as I said, it's an action adventure, but it's just something that I thought stood out. One of the more surprising things for me was actually Rotta the Hutt. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but going into the film, I wasn't expecting him to be one of the more kind of, I suppose, interesting characters. I think he kind of was. I feel like some people will say, oh no, he wasn't, but I mean, as I said, like, you know, talking in the broad of this film, you know, this film didn't give as much, you know, for the audience. I kind of thought out of all the characters, he was quite interesting. And I actually enjoyed what they did with him. I feel like he's going to be, you know, a bit more of importance later going on with the New Republic, which is interesting, you know, and I like the fact that he didn't want to simply become another version of his father. You know, the idea of wanting to forge his own identity and make his own path and actually stay away from anything of what his father was. That was probably one of the more interesting character elements in the film. This video is sponsored by 3&D Creations. Do you like nerdy stuff? Well, of course you do. Otherwise you wouldn't have clicked on this video. We make 3D printed keycaps and other accessories inspired by a mixture of games and films. If this interests you, the link is in the description. And let's get on with the video. Now, you know, was it, as I said, was it groundbreaking character development? No. But it was enough that I found myself invested in what was happening with him. Although, you know, I have to admit, hearing a Hutt speaking basic felt really weird. And it took me a bit to adjust to that, just because I just thought that was so odd. You know, and we've spent decades hearing Hutt speak Huttese. You know, I'm pretty sure in the Clone Wars they never spoke basic. So suddenly hearing one just casually speaking basic was definitely kind of a strange experience. But it makes sense with his story and his character, because he didn't grow up as a Hutt. Is in the traditional sense as all the other Hutts on now Hutter. You know, and he didn't. You know, he's been around people who do speak mainly in basic. He's adapted to the world, you know, opposed to something like his father. But that's something I want to kind of mention as well. You know, as much as because it did make sense. You know, but it was noticeable. Like, I kept thinking, God, it's so weird that he's speaking basic. You know, and the thing I was less sure was more so about the twins who were also speaking basic, because from what I understand in the Star Wars universe, Hutts generally can speak Basic, but they just choose not to. And part of their power comes from the fact that everyone else has to adapt to them, not the other way around. So seeing them all speaking Basic kind of felt a little bit odd. With Rotta, I can understand, because his character, he doesn't see that as power. He wants to be liked by people, so that's why he's speaking Basic. He wants people to like him and connect with him, so he's speaking Basic. Where with other Hutts like Jabba and the twins, they, people have to learn Huttese so that they can talk to the Hutt, not the other way around. It's a power play, And however, with all that said, I completely understand why Lucasfilm probably made that decision, because this film is, aimed at a more broader audience. Not everyone watching is going to be a hardcore Star Wars fan, so they're not going to want to read subtitles, so they're going to speak Basic to ease for the audience. A lot of families are going to see it, a lot of younger viewers are going to see it because of Grogu, and having long stretches of subtitles probably isn't something Disney wanted. So while I don't personally love the choice, I understand why they made it. It's a practicality thing. But yeah, I also do want to say that the planet Nal Hutta, I've always wanted to see Nal Hutta on screen. I've always just been fascinated by that planet, that the Hutts are kind of all there. I don't know, I just thought, I've done I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I've kind of looked a lot into the backstory and the Hutts and the Hutt Wars and how they came to power. I find that just really interesting. Speaking of another planet, I don't know what it was called, I can't remember, but the planet where Rotta, again, I don't know, is being held was also really cool. It had some strong visuals, I kind of thought. It was quite a cool vibe. It made for a good setting for action sequences. And it also kind of just felt lived in. I don't know, just sometimes I feel like Star Wars lately has kind of had that problem. But it really did feel like the planet was lived in by the community or by the people on the planet, by the citizens. It felt just a bit real, I suppose, which I thought was quite nice. So yeah, it had strong visuals. It was cool. One thing I was secretly hoping for, though, I was hoping we'd see Rotta wearing some kind of Hutt battle armor. I know in some of the old Legends materials, Hutts were depicted wearing armor during ancient conflicts, and honestly, I don't know. I always thought that just looked awesome. And it's a tiny thing, but part of me was waiting for Rotta to show up in the pit or the Colosseum, just see him looking like an armored tank. I just thought that would have been so cool. But yeah, sadly, it never happened. But maybe one day, maybe another time. But I thought that would have been sick. I thought that would have been so cool. Another thing I wasn't entirely sold on was the return of the Razor Crest. Oh my god, Razor Crest, sorry. I understand why they did it. People love the ship, it's iconic. And obviously for the film, it's collecting bounties, so kind of the Naboo starfighter isn't really gonna work. But it just kind of almost felt like the franchise was just kind of hitting a reset button a little bit on The Mandalorian. Din's got his ship back, we're traveling around the galaxy, back to, Adventure of the Week sort of style storytelling. Just gave me the feeling that we're circling back to familiar territory rather than pushing the character somewhere new. Again, not necessarily bad, just something that just stood out to me. One criticism I have seen online that people are saying, people are kind of saying, oh, it's just a kid's film. I don't fully agree with that. I don't think it's a film made only for children. I think it's I think it's just a very accessible film. It's an easy watch. It's lighter. It's less intense than something like Andor, for sure. It's certainly not as dark as some of the earlier Mandalorian material, I think. But I don't think that automatically the same thing as being a kids movie. I think it's just aimed to appeal to as many people as possible. And that's kind of the thing when you do something quite safe, you know. And again, you know, I mean, I always think it's best to take risks, but then again, Project Hail Mary was, I guess you could say, was kind of a safe film, and I thought that was amazing. You know, it was really good. You know, and whether that's like a good thing or a bad thing, you know, that will depend on the viewer. That's a personal thing, I think. Now, I've also seen a lot of discussion about the box office. You know, people have kind of pointed out that it's not exactly setting the world on fire financially. Interestingly, you know, horror films are actually doing pretty good this year. I just saw Backrooms yesterday, and that was bloody good. But Obsession has overtaken, like, Star Wars, I think, in the box office, which is kind of crazy, really. You know, Star Wars is not a small franchise. You know, you look at Battlefront 2, and that's still got a crazy amount of player base on it, you know. And that's just the gaming community of Star Wars, sort of thing, you know. I wouldn't be surprised if Disney make, though, like, a huge amount of money from the merchandise. And, you know, I mean, let's be honest, Grogu is a merchandising machine. You know, Grogu sells loads. And I think there were 3 adverts, toy adverts, of Grogu or the Mandalorian before the film started. So that's kind of what I get when people say, oh, it's for kids, it's to sell merchandise, maybe, if that's what they mean. I agree with that. You know, but yeah, I mean, if there's one thing Star Wars has always done well, it's selling toys. And it's funny because when you compare it to something like Andor, you've got a critically acclaimed series that people absolutely love, including myself, but it's not exactly generating endless toy sales. Where the Mandalorian and Grogu are almost the opposite. You know, they're incredibly marketable characters. And they're also very cheap, because you can put anyone in the helmet of the Mandalorian and anyone in the outfit, and that's okay. You know, it sells. The character can technically live on forever. It's not tied to a face like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia. You know what I mean? You know, same goes for Grogu. You know, you're paying a puppeteer. You know, so you're kind of winning, really. You've got these. I mean, geez, like the profit of those characters, probably a lot. Probably why Disney love them. But yeah, so would I recommend seeing it? I would. You know, especially if you're already a Star Wars fan. You know, obviously if you want to go and see something else, then probably lean towards that. As I said, it's a very safe film. It's fun, but it's very safe. Doesn't make you really leaving cinema thinking about anything, and that's kind of what people want from entertainment and movies. People want to be moved. You know, but for me, if a new Star Wars film comes out, I'm going to go and watch it. You know, I'm a big Star Wars fan, you know. And if you're the same, you'll probably have a good time. The film works as a standalone adventure. You don't necessarily need to, I think, have seen episodes of The Mandalorian. Obviously, you'll get more out of it if you know the history of these characters, but I think newcomers can still follow what's happening. You know, you could watch this film and then watch the series. It, you know, won't be massively detrimental. So, my final thoughts: The Mandalorian and Grogu is fun. The action is good. The music is fantastic. The characters are enjoyable. I had a perfectly good time watching it. But at the same time, I don't think it challenged me. I don't think it surprised me. I don't think it left me feeling much after the credits rolled. And I think that's why people aren't talking about it. You know, or they're not talking about it much. Not because it's bad, but because it's safe. You watch it, you enjoy it, you leave the cinema, and then you move on. That and that's for me why it kind of sits around at a 2.5 or a 3-star range. It's a decent Star Wars adventure. Nothing more, nothing less. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you thought of The Mandalorian and Grogu down in the comments below. Like, did you love it? Did you hate it? Or did you sit somewhere in the middle like me? But I want to hear what other people think. Is this people's top Star Wars film? I'll be surprised if it does be people's top Star Wars film, and I'll also be surprised if it was people's most hated, because it was just a very safe movie. I wouldn't say it changed actually the franchise's position, I suppose, which isn't a good or bad thing, I suppose. But yeah, if you enjoyed this review, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you, and may autocorrect forever be in your favour. Goodbye.